Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Ratliff Mandolin's Weekly Production Diary. If you've been following the series, you know that last week we featured the final shaping of a neck, and with these 10 mandolins right here, that was pretty much the thrust of last week's work, was finally shaping the neck, and I also sanded all of the sides down to 80 grit paper and worked on some of the backs that had not been completely trimmed up, and that's what we're going to feature in this week's episode. So let me tell you and show you exactly what we're going to be doing, and I'm going to make a drawing of the profile of a back pretty much as it's glued onto the mandolin, and it's arched like that, and this is going to be over exaggerated, of course. And then we come in here and just make it flat for a minute, and then bring the thickness down. Gradually gets thicker, back down to a little bit of thickness, and then swoops up and it's flat here. Now this dimension here, if you can see that, is always too much. You would just leave a little bit of overhang, and then you trim it off after you've glued the back on. Now once you've trimmed it off, you still have a little bit of this flat area here, because you never really know how the thing is going to sit on the mandolin. The mandolin sizes, some of the molds have a little more give to them than others, and so some of the mandolins are never exactly the same, and so you have a little bit of overhang, and therefore you don't want to make this point right here is not really anything that you can nail down that early in the construction, and usually you wait until after it's glued on, and then we'll clean it up. So having said that, I'm going to take this mandolin right here, which is mandolin number 8, and it has a flat spot all the way around through here, and we need to make that swoop of the curve go right up to the very edge, and I'm going to show you in this episode exactly how I do that. But before I get started doing the work, let me show you the fixture that I'm going to be using to hold the mandolin while I do the job. To begin with, I have a big, huge piece of duct work that I bought at one of the big box stores, and it's filled with concrete. So it is very, very heavy. When I filled this thing full of concrete, about the last thing that I'd done was I left 2 bolts, and you can see them here, sticking straight up out of that concrete, and sticking up about that far, and now I can bolt down anything on top of this concrete pillar that I want. Now what I have bolted onto this one right now is a basic wild outline of a mandolin on this first layer here. The next layer up is a ledge that actually is about 3/8 of an inch smaller than your average mandolin, and then 2 layers of things that the mandolin will fit down into, so that the mandolin will sit down on this ledge and be held more or less in place like that. To keep it from falling over forward, I have a wedge-shaped block with a leather padding, and it just slips right up in there, and you just put it in there till it stops, and the mandolin more or less stays where you want it to. And I keep a tray of leather strips, because this mandolin does have a certain amount of play in there. Keep leather strips, to pad it out with. Some leather pads here, like that. And I'll just go through, try to find out where I have a empty spot. Put these leather pieces in here. And before you know it, I pretty much have a stable mandolin to work on. This whole setup, a concrete filled piece of duct work with a specially shaped tray bolted on top, works very well for an F style or an A style. And so we're going to load this mandolin here, and I am going to show you how I use this jig to make the final shapes of an A style or an F style back. Now let me pull this light around here and get a good shadow going, and maybe we can see what I was describing earlier, that flat spot on the edge of the rim. Get a good close-up of that if we can. Now you can see the swoop as it comes down and thins out. The top of the back is thin right here, comes back up and then levels out. So we have a pretty level thing right there, and we want to actually bring this swoop all the way out to the edge. That's what we're shooting for. Let me explain the tool that I'm going to use for the first step of cleaning this back up. This is a gouge. A gouge is basically like a chisel with a bent blade or a rolled over blade, and they are many different ways of how these guys that make these things measure them and call their sizes. But this one is a 1/2 inch wide, and it is on a radius circle of about 1 inch. And this that is about, another manufacturer might call that a number 7. They're also numbered from like 3, 5, 7, 8, 9 in the width of the diameter. And so this is about a number 7, about a 1/2 inch wide number 7 gouge with a sharpening on the inside, which makes it an in canal instead of on the outside, much like this one, which is sharpened on the outside of the sweep, and this one is sharpened on the inside. So this is the one that I use an awful lot for this job right here. It's been a favorite, and I've owned this thing for probably 30 years. Now I'm going to take this light and get it pretty low so that we create shadows if we can, and just very gently ease that ledge off. I want to control yourself and how much your hand can move, because quite often you'll come all the way through and hit up here. So you want to just make sure that one hand kind of keeps the other hand from shooting on through, if that makes any sense. Really not trying to do anything except just remove the bulk of it and get the basic shape there. Now, anytime you use a gouge or chisels to shape something, then you have to move to something finer to finish that job out. Now, quite often, if it's a sort of an outside curve, you can use a needle rasp or something like that. If it's an inside curve, you just about either have to have a specially shaped rasp or some scrapers, cabinet scrapers. Now, they come in all different sizes and shapes. This is the most commonly available one, and you can just kind of roll it around until you find the part of that curve that more or less suits you and fits the radius of what you're trying to clean up. I have my two favorites are these that are some sort of shaft spacers, real hard steel, and I've had them for quite a while. I've ground them out so that they'll go around a F-style scroll, but I use these a lot. So you for the inside sweep stuff that you want to clean up, you can use cabinet scrapers. Anything that's a piece of metal that's sharp enough to, much like glass, just scrape. I'll show you that. Now this will be sort of a before and after. There's the before, just the rough gouge marks. And this is about 4, 5, 6 inches of what I've scraped with one of those rounded scrapers. So what a huge difference between that and that. That's the scrapers will certainly smooth things out an awful lot. Quite often you have to change directions, especially with curly maple. Sometimes it wants to dig and tear. Lots of times you can just turn around and come the other direction, it'll quit digging and tearing. Sometimes nothing you can do seems to help. You just have to negotiate your way through it. It's been roughly shaped in with scrapers, but that is nowhere near being finished. It's still humpy and bumpy and rough, and there's some grain tear out, and so we have the rough shape that is put in. It's even beyond the rough shape. It's the shape we want, but it's just not smooth at all. So what's the next step? Well, the next step involves some 60 grit paper and a very specially shaped piece of wood. Now, this specially shaped piece of wood is shaped to be very close to the dimension or the radius of that mandolin back, no matter where we're at. I cut this out of 3/4 inch shelving board, and it's about a pie-shaped wedge there. But the trick about this piece of wood is the fact that this edge, worn with use, is shaped about the same diameter or radius, I guess, that we want that swoop to be, so that this thing basically sits down. It's flat on the top, but on the bottom, all over here, it fits a certain shape. Now I could get fancy and use double stick tape or whatever and just put sandpaper on the back of that, but I simply just wrap a piece of sandpaper around it. And like I said, we're going to start with 60 grit and just start sanding. Now, I don't know how well the camera will show it, but once we pull our really good shadow casting light around, then it's pretty easy to see where this 60 grit has touched and where it hasn't. Like I said, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see a spot here, a spot there, about the size of a pencil eraser. On down through there, it's still rough. So you have to get a good sideways light and just very, very carefully look and see where the scratches, sandpaper scratches, are and where they're not. Where they are, you're good, and where they're not, you need to go back over it again. Now, after about 15 minutes of sanding with the sandpaper wrapped around this piece of wood, you take the light, put it down real low and shine sideways. Look at all the scratches and get all of that the unscratched stuff sanded out. Then you'll find that it's time to move on to the next step, which is a final check for humps and bumps and dips and waves and that sort of thing. Spread your fingers out, spread your hand out, lay the whole hand down, or you can just take fingers and kind of run, and you'll find that, oh, well, there's a spot right here that kind of dives off pretty quickly. Not so bad, but it's still right in there. On this side, lots of times you have to work on the transition because from here to here, because this one is an in canal and this is an out canal, so you have a hump like this has to be mated to this right here, so it's got to be nice and smooth and even, so that you really never notice you're changing from one to the other. And this one probably needs a little bit of work as well. So it's time to just go and finally do everything that needs to be done before you go to finer and finer grit of sandpaper. A very useful tool for that job is another specially shaped piece of wood, which is simply, this is just like a 2x5 board that is shaped very much on the end like that gouge you looked at earlier. The whole thing is rolled over, flat on this side, rolled over on that side, and again, you can just take and wrap sandpaper around it. You'll be surprised at how handy that tool is. And you can wrap the sandpaper around the flat side if you're wanting to flatten something out. I have two of them that I use on a regular basis. They're basically the same, but this one has a steeper, heavier sweep in it, and this one is more shallow, but I use them both. And here is an example of that. I'm going to wrap this 60 grit paper right here. I have a little hump going right here. I'm going to wrap the paper. Fits right down in this groove, and just sand until that hump kind of goes away. I'm going to get the steeper one. And that hump is completely gone now. Here's a real good sanding tip for you, especially when you're in the really heavy grits like 60 grit paper. 60 grit paper leaves very visible scratches in the right light. So let's say you want to get a dip out, or a hump, it doesn't really matter, but let's just say you want to get a dip out and you want to know where that dip is and whether you've gotten it out or not. Now we're going to take this sandpaper, and it doesn't really matter which way I hold it, I don't think, but we're going to reference this center line on the back, and we're going to go 45 degrees here. 45-degree angle off of that center line. I've got that wood all scratched up, and if we pull the light around here and look at it really good, we'll see that we've got scratches that go this direction. Now I'm going to take and go this direction. Pull that same light around here, and it's very easy to see if all of the scratches going this way, but you might see a spot, let's say the size of a nickel or whatever, going that direction, then you'll know that there's a dip there that's not been hit yet. Or sometimes there won't be any scratches at all in that dip. And so you'll know, okay, no matter which way I went, I've still not got to the bottom of that dip. So it's real easy with the heavier grit paper to level things out and get it really good and smooth. And I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's easy to tell whether you've went far enough or not. If you've happened to find a high spot, a nice piece of glass, we'll magically get a high spot out in just a second. And I do indeed, there's no resharpening glass. Somebody asked me last episode if I sharpened it somewhere, just broke a new piece. There's no resharpening it, you just break a new piece. And I use a glass cutter to do that with. Just cut it again and just throw it until you get pieces that are too small for you to even hold in your hand. You just throw them away at that point. Now I have, by either heavy grit sandpaper or glass or scrapers, if you so choose, I have gotten everything. I can run my hand here. Everything is gone. I don't feel any humps, any bumps, any dips. I get no indication of anything that's out of whack. Everything is smooth and elegant. And some parts of it are scraped with glass, other parts of it are 60 grit paper. So it's all different surface imperfections, but the overall shape is just perfect. So at that point, it's time to take 80 grit paper and back it with something that is got a little bit of flex, but is still kind of stiff. I have a piece of 1/4-inch rubber here that I use. I've also used a couple of pieces of leather that have been glued together with contact cement. In the past, I've also used some of that softer styrofoam, you know, to back this stuff so that it's got a little bit of bend in it. But we'll take the 80 grit paper, wrap it around this, and I will go with, now is the time to be pretty conscious of which direction you're going in regards to the grain of the wood. And at this point right here, I like to go with the grain of the wood, and we'll probably go with the grain of the wood with every grit of sandpaper afterwards. But we're just going to start sanding things and smoothing everything out. Again, with the heavy light, to look at the sanding scratches to make sure that we're getting everything out. Again, still always hunting for humps and bumps, but I doubt that we're going to find much now. And then we're going to go 80 grit, 100 or 120 grit, down to 220 grit. And then at that point right there, some folks like to go to 400 grit before they shoot finish on it, but I'm usually happy at 220. But basically that's what we need to do. Final sand this thing out. It's shaped the way we want it. Now we just need to get it smooth enough to shoot finish on it. I sure hope you will join me next week as we continue on our journey with these batch of 10 mandolins, and we're working our way towards getting finish on that. We've still got a couple of mandolins that need to have their peg heads bound and some inlay put in, so that'll make an interesting episode. So we got some stuff lined up in the future. Come back and visit us, like I said, next week, each and every week, as we post the next Ratliff Mandolins Weekly Production Diary. Hope to see you then. Bye.